Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to the fourth day of 2 weeks of Elizabeth Gaskell. Today I'm going to be talking about Elizabeth Gaskell's novella, The Grey Woman. Portion 1. There is a mill by the nectar side to which many people resort for coffee, according to the fashion which is almost national in Germany. There is nothing particularly attractive in the situation of this mill. It is on the Mainham, the flat-down romantic side of Heidelberg. The Grey Woman is a Gothic novella by Elizabeth Gaskell, first published in 1864, and it is my 11th favourite Gaskell novel/novella. There are a lot of things that I really like about The Grey Woman, and it's probably my favourite of Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic writings. Potentially, there are some of her Gothic short stories that I really love, such as The Old Nurse's Tale, which is a bit too short for me to be talking about in these 2 weeks. But out of the 3 Gothic novellas Gaskell wrote, Lois the Witch, The Poor Clare and The Grey Woman, The Grey Woman is probably my favourite, and there are many things I really enjoy about it. I have to say that from this point onwards, most of the Gaskell books I'm going to be talking about I love very, very dearly, and the reason why they're not higher up is because I love other books more rather than because I love the particular book less. But let me explain a bit what The Grey Woman is about. The Grey Woman, like so many pieces of Gothic fiction, is a frame narrative. The narrator we begin with finds herself in a mill/coffee house in Germany while travelling away from England. Poor weather prevents her and her friend from leaving the mill, and in the rush and the heat and the crowd that is trapped in the coffee house waiting for the rain to end, they end up moving out of the coffee house and going into the rooms of the mill owner's house. And while there, they see a portrait of a woman that interests them. The portrait is entitled Anna Scherzer 1778. Because they are intrigued by this portrait, they ask the mill owner about her. She is a distant relation of him, long dead, and in order to satisfy his curious English guest, the mill owner finds some papers left behind by the woman Anna's daughter, and he explains that these papers are the story of this woman who was referred to as the Grey Woman because she looked grey all of her life because of some great shock she'd had in her youth, and that this account is the account of what happened to her in her youth, which she wrote for her daughter in order to dissuade her daughter from marrying a particular man. These papers are in German. Our narrator's friend translates them into English for our narrator to read, and then what follows in the rest of the novella is an account of this woman's life. Anna grows up in sort of the lower middle classes in a mill in Germany, but she ends up moving in much finer society when she goes to France on a visit with a friend of hers. While there, she encounters this charming young man who falls desperately in love with her. They're married, and then after they're married, she begins to realise that not everything is what it seems to be, and the story goes on from there. There are a lot of things that I really love about The Grey Woman, and a lot of things I find fascinating about it. One of the things that I really enjoy in Victorian Gothic fiction is how layered the narratives are. If you take The Grey Woman, the bulk of this novella is this account by this woman Anna. Anna, who is already herself a slightly unreliable narrator, but we're not hearing Anna's account firsthand. We are reading the account that Anna wrote, that has been kept by her daughter, that has been translated into English by our English narrator's friend, which our English narrator is then recounting for us. So we have this many layered process where we're not getting to see events properly firsthand because there are so many layers, so many screens between us and the main narrative. It's a technique used quite a lot in Victorian Gothic fiction. For example, you see it in Wuthering Heights and to an extent in The Tenant of Wildfire Hall, and it's a technique that I really enjoy because I find it really intriguing. As I mentioned earlier on when talking about The Poor Clare, it's notable as well how Victorian Gothic fiction is so often set outside of England. And just taking Gaskell's work, The Poor Clare takes place partly in England but also partly in France, Lois the Witch takes place in America, and this story, The Grey Woman, takes place in France and in Germany, which distances it from everything that is English and therefore respectable, and makes it much more romantic and dramatic for an English imagination. And then the story itself is really, really interesting. It follows Anna and her relationship with her husband. It explores issues of controlling and psychologically abusive marriages, and it explores the lengths that people can be pushed to when they are trapped. I also really enjoy the relationship between Anna and her maid, and I can't help but read it as a kind of romantic one in some ways. There is so much more affection between them than there is between Anna and her husband, and in one part of the book they do spend some time in hiding, in which Anna's friend spends her time living as a man, dressing up and acting as Anna's husband, and several times Anna refers to her friend dressing up as a man as her husband. There are some scenes in this which border on horror and which are described beautifully. It is potentially the most Gothic and the most exciting and thrilling of her Gothic things. While I think there are many interesting things about The Poor Clare, it's not a story I find that exciting or thrilling. Likewise with Lois the Witch, because I find it a slightly distancing narrative for me and I don't have that strong connection with the characters. I don't feel as worried or concerned, and I don't get bound up in the fear of the characters. But The Grey Woman, like, there are some quite scary bits in it, and there are some dark, Gothic, exciting, dramatic bits that I really, really love. If you would like to read some Gothic fiction by Elizabeth Gaskell, I I would highly recommend The Grey Woman. I think the reason why it's not higher up on this list is just because there are books that I find more complex and more interesting, and because while I love Gothic fiction, I think I like Gothic fiction that is something else more than I like kind of standard Gothic fiction. And I think The Grey Woman, while a perfect and interesting example of Gothic fiction, for me is just a really interesting, exciting Gothic story. And while it does in some ways explore themes of psychological trauma and damaging marriages, I think for the most part it is a dramatic, pacey Gothic tale. And for me, what I love most about Elizabeth Gaskell is her psychologically complex love stories, and this is not one of them. But it is certainly an interesting read, and one I would highly recommend if you want to pick up some of Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic fiction, and if you're looking for an exciting and fairly short read. I think that is all I have to say on The Grey Woman. I think it is an enjoyable Elizabeth Gaskell, though it is not my favourite. Please let me know if you have read it and what you thought of it, and I'll be back tomorrow to talk about another Elizabeth Gaskell book.